Looks like our recording has started, so I'm going to go ahead and start with my introduction. And hello, everyone. This is Rebecca Dallin. I'm the Assistant Superintendent for Stormwater Quality here at the City of Oklahoma City. I'd like to officially welcome everyone to today's Lunch and Learn event. I hope everyone has a tasty lunch and is ready to hear from our guest speaker. We will begin momentarily, so I wanted to provide some information to help enhance everyone's experience during the presentation today. In order to reduce background noise, we ask that everyone keep themselves muted during the presentation unless you have a question. Then feel free to unmute, or you can always type your questions into chat. Either way, I will be monitoring chat for questions, and we will have our guest speaker answer as many questions as we have time for today. If anyone would like to receive a certificate of attendance for today's webinar, feel free to send me an email to request that. I'm going to put my email address into chat right now so everyone will have that handy. Each of the presentations in this virtual Lunch and Learn series will be recorded and available in chat in this meeting if we rejoin this calendar event later. We are also posting these to our okc.gov website, so be sure to check our website in a week or so if you'd like to rewatch this Lunch and Learn, or if there's anyone else that you know of that missed it, feel free to point them in that direction. And you can rewatch any of the others we've hosted so far this year. So of course, if anyone has any questions at this time, feel free to type them into chat, and I will post that website link into chat later today. So up next is the main presentation for today's webinar. Today we're going to hear from Josh Rasp from Triangular Silt Dike Company. With over 20 years experience in the erosion and sedimentation control industry, Josh joined Triangular Silt Dike Company as an outside technical sales representative in 2018. Prior to that, he managed a successful site restoration contracting and consulting company. Josh has technical expertise in soil health, native grass restoration, wetland and riparian mitigation and construction, and stormwater pollution prevention plan compliance. He has been a part of over 5,000 acres restored from the Great Lakes to the Rio Grande. Again, if anyone has any questions during today's presentation, feel free to type them into chat or unmute yourself and ask as needed. So Josh, looks like we can see your screen. We can see, I don't know if you want to change it to presentation mode, but we can see the left side as well. And you're muted.
All right, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Give me some feedback here. We're gonna get to the slideshow mode. I think. Bingo.
Yep, that's
all
the
right,
one.
Rebecca, are you seeing just the slides now?
Yes, I am. Perfect.
Okay. Okay, perfect. Thank you. Give me a few seconds here. I'm gonna. All right. Hey, okay, I'll get started. Thank you, Rebecca. And thank you to the Oklahoma City Stormwater team in general. Appreciate the opportunity. I appreciate the opportunity to represent Triangular Silt Dike Company. We are a manufacturer and distributor of erosion control products, erosion and sedimentation control products, as well as geotextile fabrics, geogrids and such, road building fabrics, and pretty much all things heavy civil. We're out in Luther, Oklahoma, right next door, right across the river from the old Chicken Shack, if anybody knows where that is. Chicken Shack has now moved to Arcadia now and kind of gone upscale now in the big town of Arcadia. So come see us sometime. We're not that far out. I want to invite everybody to chime in at any point with questions. These online presentations are kind of tough in that I can't really read a crowd, can't really see faces. So if anybody's got any questions, please chime in. It makes for an easier presentation, and it makes for a little bit more dialogue back and forth. So feel free to unmute your own mics and chime in at any point. It won't disrupt me. I wanted to talk a little bit today about our company and about erosion and sedimentation control more broadly. I think it's important to get our name out there. It's important for us to make sure everybody knows we're a willing partner. We're a manufacturer, we're a distributor, we're in business to make money selling products to people, but we're also in the business of providing ideas and technical support, and working together. So we invite feedback, we invite questions. We like to solve problems. I'm a little bit curious about today's crowd. I'm wondering, I know that Rebecca put this invitation out to stormwater permittees and also industrial permittees. And so I'm wondering kind of what the balance is on that. I think something I've always been curious about is if there's more opportunity if there's more opportunity for our company and myself in the industrial side. I've never been able to quite figure that out. So I invite anybody listening today, as I kind of go through my stuff and you hear kind of what we do and what I do and what I know and what our company provides. If there's a gap that's not being filled, holler at me, send me, give us a call, send me an email. I'm curious if there's more industrial opportunity for our company, but I really don't know what I don't really know what those needs look like. So I'm kind of striking out blind on that and look for input from other people.
Hey, Josh.
Like Rebecca said, oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry. So if everyone participating, if you have access to chat, why don't you put, if you're from a municipality or if you're from a business, why don't you put who your employer is, or just, you can say industrial permittee or construction permittee if you like. I put MS4 for me because I work for a municipality. So if everyone would type into chat, that'd be great. Then we can have a little bit of an idea of who all's attending. And Josh, I just wanted to share with you, while folks are chiming in there, I've had some permittees on the industrial side that landfills are a good example. A lot of times they have issues with erosion, but it's not just the tall facilities like that. Even some of the other facilities that you wouldn't necessarily think about having the potential for erosion issues. Sometimes they just have a little hill on their property, and so they end up getting rills in those things. Or they have drainage channels in their facilities, and maybe they want to slow some sediment and some things down. I've seen a couple of different facilities that have triangular silt dikes in their drainage channels, and I've seen a lot of places where the products that you guys offer could potentially help out their erosion issues. So just kind of keep all that sediment in place. So just a little bit smaller footprint maybe than a construction site, and certainly they're not intentionally disturbing the land. It just kind of disturbs itself.
Yeah, it just happens. It happens, and then when you've got things on site that are more critical, almost sometimes too, it almost becomes more important to keep everything on site than it, honestly, than keeping sediment on site, depending on what your discharge is or what's in your discharge. So yeah, I'm fascinated by the industrial side of it, and hope that we can find more opportunities there. And something else, and Rebecca, you might even know more about this. Yeah, well, I'm sure you know more about this than me, and probably even some of the audience knows a lot more about this than me. But with the new stormwater guidelines, or the renewal of the state permit, I think there's going to be a little bit more scrutiny on not necessarily the industrial side, but the construction side from more of an industrial standpoint. I think there's going to be a little bit more scrutiny about contamination and containment from more of like a fuel standpoint and like a PCB standpoint. And that's something that's foreign to me and foreign to Jason and Gary and Bobby at Triangular. We really don't know about like the PCBs and the containment. And so that's something we're really particularly looking for some feedback from the industrial crowd. If there's some packages, if there are products that we can start carrying or start researching at this point, I think scrutiny is going to get a more detailed with the next round of renewal. And so we need some help from the public in order to carry the right products and provide the right expertise. So we're looking for that, from everybody.
Sure. Sounds good. So it looks like we have Brendan from City of Bethany, Mike from City of Moore. We have Buddy from Sims Metals, a metal recycling company. We have Bruce from the Village. Perfect. Nick Welch is with Wallace Design Collective, a consulting company. We have Russell Henry with Bison Building Company, a construction permittee. And we also have Wyatt with Prairie Dirt Solutions, a soil manufacturer. So I've got a little bit of everything here today. So yeah, I think with
Bison Building, good to hear you on. And then soil manufacturing. Who is the soil? What's the company there? Soil managing?
Prairie Dirt Solutions.
Dirt, okay.
It's a big composting operation and
awesome.
And similar things too.
And okay, I'll do a little research into that, and I'll also be looking for any sort of feedback. I'll get into compost just a little bit, so if there's any feedback that can be sent my way, please speak up.
Right, and then we just had Chris with Hera type into chat as well. So we've got.
Sweet. Okay. Well, I wanted to kind of start my talk, and my talk's going to be about BMPs in general. So these, again, I'm coming at this from the standpoint of construction BMPs, from notice of intent filed with the city or filed with the state, and then a stormwater pollution prevention plan is created, and then developers, constructors, the people whose names are on the permits, then that's where the process begins. Now you've got your stormwater pollution prevention plan. Now where do we go with it? Now you have to try to keep your offsite discharge to a minimum. You have to control your offsite discharge. And so my talk today is going to be focused primarily on the BMPs, the best management practices, best management practices from a construction standpoint. So it may be a little bit off on some of the industrial side, but it's kind of still the same thing. One thing I like to talk about, the number one BMP, very best BMP, it's not something you buy, it's a plan. It's a plan to have everybody that's involved in a project or everybody that's involved with a site on the same page. Who's responsible for what? There may be people disturbing, there may be people managing the disturbance, but who's responsible for what? And the earlier you can line that out, the earlier you can identify the roles in a construction project, particularly, the better off you're going to be. So have a plan that goes beyond the stormwater pollution prevention plan. I mean a BMP number one, a plan that's not the stormwater pollution prevention plan, not the SWP. Have a plan for the parties involved. And specifically thinking about that, I asked about triggers and thresholds. If as as a permit holder, you may decide to take care of things on your own. You may hire an outside company, but regardless of which way you go, who is responsible for what are the triggers and what are their thresholds? And so if we think about this from the standpoint of hiring an erosion or sedimentation control contractor, let's use that for the example. At what point are their actions triggered? And at what thresholds are they allowed to come onto the site to do work for you? So you start with an erosion control plan, and you've got a piece of paper that shows silt fence and silt dikes and riprap and gabion baskets, and everything's laid out very clearly on a plan. But that plan is a piece of paper, and it's not dirt, it's not earth, it's not a three-dimensional space. So I encourage people to think about this plan to start with and identify whoever your partner is from a contractual standpoint. Identify those triggers and thresholds. Is there a dollar limit for work to be done? Is there a time limit on things to be done? Should things be checked in a periodic basis, or should things be checked and taken care of on a dollar basis? Is it a per rain event basis? Is it identify those things, have a sit-down meeting, and come together with and identify who's responsible for what and at what times. Another thing to think about with that BMP number one, the plan, is how much ground has to be disturbed at any one given time. Is there a better way of disturbing ground than what is laid out on the grade plan? Do you have to push 30 acres of dirt? Typically, when you're moving ground, you bring in big heavy iron and you want to move as much dirt as possible. But that may not be the most effective way. And so you may have some mobilization costs to think about. But maybe there's a better way of moving ground, and perhaps paying a little bit of extra money on the front end for mobilization costs, but not disturbing as much ground on the flip side. And so the very number one best way of managing stormwater runoff and erosion control, and then thus sedimentation or sediment control, is by not disturbing ground, leaving ground undisturbed. So the more ground you can leave undisturbed in a big project, the easier erosion control becomes. It's not always feasible, but it's something to think about. And it's worth asking those questions from your contractors in the planning stage. BMP number two that I like to drive home is being proactive. And if there are any city stormwater inspectors on this chat, they'll probably vouch for this. They'll probably understand that when you're going to inspect a site from a stormwater standpoint, from a SWIP compliance standpoint, the more proactive the permit holder is, I think the more grace they get from the inspectors. You don't have to be perfect. Perfect is the idea, but it's not what actually happens. And so if you can be proactive, try new things out, do things, show your inspectors that you're doing your best and you're trying new things, that carries so much weight. That's going to get you a lot more grace through the duration of your construction project. So having the BMPs in place that are on the stormwater, or excuse me, having the BMPs that are having the BMPs in place that are on your erosion control plan is a great place to start. And then redlining your erosion control plan. Draw it up, make notes, show on paper what you have done in the field. That way, when your inspector comes along, and they see something that's maybe a little bit off kilter, a little bit, a little bit different. They see it. And then when they come to the office or the job trailer and they look at that erosion control plan and they see that you've made notes, they see that you're taking an active role in erosion and sedimentation control, or offsite discharge anyway. So go above and beyond the erosion control plan. And I put that in quotations. The erosion control plan is simply a piece of paper that you start with. The idea is that it grows and it changes and it evolves with time. Just back that up with a red line on paper. So if anybody's got any questions, they see what you're doing. Be proactive about it. Try new things. Another point right there at the bottom, minimize off-site discharge. I think we can all agree that zero off-site discharge is nearly impossible. It can happen, not very cost effective. Off-site discharge is going to happen, but minimize the offset discharge of pollutants in general, sediment, PCBs, whatever it may be. Minimize, do your best. And when you're proactive about minimizing that offsite discharge, everybody's on board for that kind of thing, and it gives you a lot of grace with the inspectors. So that being said, I kind of want to get into, again, taking more of an erosion and sedimentation angle at this and less of the industrial, but again, I'm open and I need input from industrial people, but I'm going to go into what is erosion and what is sedimentation. Sometimes we talk about erosion control and sediment control. And to me, I put the ATIO in there in parentheses because sedimentation is kind of the important part to me. You've got erosion, and that is the displacement of soil. And then you've got sedimentation, and that is the settling of soil. So the two are important. You've got soil loss, and then you've got soil deposition. So from a construction standpoint, you're going to lose soil off your job site. Where's that soil going to go? Where is it going to be deposited? That's sedimentation. So you've got erosion, sedimentation. If sedimentation is on your job site, you're winning. You're winning the battle. So if sedimentation is in front of a triangular silt dike, or in front of a silt fence, or within a compost sock, you're winning the battle. If sedimentation is in the golf course's pond downstream, you've lost that battle. You may not have lost the war, but you've lost that battle. So it's important to think about those two concepts, erosion, sedimentation, two different concepts, and there are different sets of BMPs that combat those two thoughts, those two processes. So erosion, just to kind of dial into it, is, like I said, the displacement of soil. It starts with typically raindrops or traffic. It could be pickup truck tires. It could be tracks on a skid loader or an excavator. Anything that dislodges soil that puts it into motion, be it wind or water. There are a couple of things to think about, or a few things to think about. Driving forces behind erosion. Is it sheet flow? After those soil particles are put into place, do they begin moving by sheet flow or concentrated flow or wind? So we think about a big broad space, it's sheet flow. Sheet flow begins to aggregate, congregate, becomes concentrated flow. Wind, kind of a different animal. It just happens. Again, like I said, sediment is in its most simple form a soil particle size, but for practical purposes, we think about it as deposited soil particles that were put in motion by erosion, be it water or wind. And then where that sediment stops is the critical part. Does it stop on your construction site? Does it stop on your permitted construction site? Or does it stop and settle somewhere else? That's the big problem. We're all trying to keep our sedimentation on our job site and not in the Canadian River or the Deep Fork River that then becomes, or the creeks that feed into Lake Thunderbird. We're trying to keep it out of our water sources. We're trying to keep it out of our lakes. We're trying to keep it on site. We're trying to keep it off the neighbor's property, even nuisances, even golf courses. Golf courses are pulling water out of their ponds designed for irrigation water. And when the sediment load is greater in their ponds, it's a cost on them. It's a cost that we all share. And so by keeping our sedimentation on site, that's the ultimate goal.
Hey, Josh.
Like anything in the construct. Yeah, go ahead, Rebecca.
Another thing to consider is making sure that that sediment doesn't clog up storm drain inlets. So,
I have a tendency to look right past that, and that's a great point, Rebecca. And there was a slide that I had on this presentation, and I didn't save the latest and greatest version of it inadvertently, but there's a graph, and if you think about efficacy, or if you think about cost and efficacy, and then draw a line through the middle of it, golly, I had it and it was perfect. But the point being that erosion control is the cheapest, most effective BMP. Once you get down the line to, let's say BMPs you put in front of curb inlets or drains at the end of a cul-de-sac, I get more calls about different products. There's so many different products out there on the market for inlet protection. So like bags, drop inlet bags, curb inlet protection. That is the end of the line. That's the that's kind of like the Alamo. That's the last stand. Is we're trying to keep water out of the stormwater drains. So we're going to spend $500 to $700 per inlet to keep sediment out of those drains. Whereas that $500 to $700 per drain, multiply that out over an entire development, that's a pretty high cost. Whereas you might have been better off preventing the erosion or doing the best you could do to prevent the erosion to start with. And so I get a lot of calls about, everybody wants to know about the dandy bags, the drop inlet bags, the curb, just everything we can do to protect our inlets. That's what inspectors want to see. They're important. We want to make sure those storm drain facilities are protected. But hey, we need to protect that way back up at the start and do our best to prevent sediment making it to that point anyway. There is a significant increase in costs the further down the water line you go. The further down that sediment particle goes, things get more and more expensive along the way to stop it. So that's it. Thank you for bringing that up, and I'll touch on that a little bit more a little bit later. This is a quick slide about erosion control. So we've got erosion control, sedimentation control. It's important to think about the driving forces behind erosion. Is it impact or is it movement? Those are two different concepts. Impact meaning raindrop or wheels, tracks, etc. Movement being the concentrated flow of forces, be it water or wind, typically being the two. So if you think about erosion from an impact standpoint and how to combat that, well, number one is standing vegetation. Again, this goes back to not disturbing soils. Is there a way to leave vegetation in place and not disturb the ground so that soil does not get lost? If soil has to be lost, how can you minimize the impact of either wind or water? That could be done with mulches, straws, composts, blankets, any number of BMPs, but those are BMPs that are designed for impact. And then there's the movement side of things. That's where water or wind aggregates. And then break that down a little bit further. Is it a sheet flow? Is it a broad flow? Or is it a concentrated flow? Oftentimes, a broad flow leads to a concentrated flow. And oftentimes, the BMPs would be the same, but it's still kind of the same concept to think about. Grass, undisturbed ground, or replanted grass is a fantastic BMP. Then come things like silt fence, triangular silt dikes, straw wattles, compost sots, and the like. As that broad flow begins to concentrate and move downhill, then we start looking at things that are a little bit beefier and more robust for concentrated flows. So then we get into our triangular silt dike barriers, straw wattles, compost sots. And then we get into like rock bags or gabion baskets and the like. And then we think about how to keep those concentrated flows in place with turf reinforcement mats or riprap or something like Flexamat, which is a product that we carry, and that is a concrete type block mat that is designed to be vegetated. And I'll get into that a little bit more later, but it's important to think about erosion control in those two regards. Is it an impact or a movement standpoint? That's going to start facilitating or kind of get you thinking about what would be the right BMP. So if we go back, I'm going to go back right here, right quick, talking about impact or movement-driven erosion control. So kind of an underrated best management practice is mulch. And meaning mulch, not necessarily buying mulch. I'm not talking about buying bagged mulch. I'm talking about utilizing an off-site or an on-site, on-site product, waste product, essentially. We used to, 15 years ago, it was common practice just to pile up brush and burn it on a construction site. It's still kind of common practice, but you see a lot more mulching going on, be it in a tub grinder or be it through the use of an attachment on a piece of equipment, forestry mulcher, something like that. But that's making use of a resource that you've got on site. Most construction sites around here, at least east of I-35, there are plenty of trees and therefore plenty of mulch on a construction site. So it's a great way of utilizing what is a waste, essentially. And mulch can be used in so many different ways. You can simply spread it out over a construction site, which minimizes raindrop energy. And that's where erosion starts. You can pile mulch up as buffers and barriers, and then you get somewhat of a filtering capacity with that, essentially a waste. It's important to understand, though, that grass does not, and without getting too wonky about the carbon nitrogen ratios, the carbon nitrogen cycle, it's important to understand that it's difficult to grow grass long-term grass, native grasses, turf grasses, whatever it be, if the carbon content of a soil is too high without the nitrogen to go along with it. So to utilize on-site waste mulch chippings is not the best way to establish long-term grass, but make use of it during the construction process. Again, it dissipates raindrop energy, and that's really where erosion starts. So that's a really great BMP that I think is beginning to get a lot more traction. Compost is another one. Again, 15 years ago, there were no sources that I know of, to the best of my knowledge, there were no sources of bulk compost in Oklahoma. And as Rebecca had mentioned in kind of my intro and my first slide, I've planted grasses and done erosion control kind of across the country. And compost was always a big part of big component of that in a lot of other places, not necessarily in Oklahoma. We did a lot of textile work, and a lot of Texas highway work utilized compost. Well, there are big composting facilities, big municipal and private composting facilities in Texas. There weren't at that time in Oklahoma. So compost, to me and to Oklahoma, is kind of relatively new. And it's fantastic. We could do an entire presentation on compost. And I don't know enough about compost proper to do that full hour presentation, but it's something to think about. But compost in a general, in a big nutshell, is you're taking waste, breaking it down, and going back to that carbon nitrogen cycle I was talking about. You're bringing that closer to neutrality, so it's a usable product that not only dissipates energy of raindrops and sheet flows, but then provides nutrients for soils. So that's something to think about. Something I can't speak on very detailed, but something to look into.
Hey, Josh.
Yes, ma'am.
For our monthly webinar series, which is unrelated to this Lunch and Learn series, but it's still us, September 21st, we're actually going to have a presentation on using compost for erosion control, and that's going to be given by Trish Morris of Ideal Homes and Terry Craighead of Fertile Ground. So
awesome.
If anyone would like to go to that, if you're not already signed up for a monthly webinar series, please feel free to send me an email, and I'll be happy to get you connected with that series.
Hey, Rebecca, be sure you send me the link for that or whatever you've got. I want to share that with the Central Oklahoma Home Builders Association as well. Okay. Terry had mentioned that to me, but I couldn't remember the date that he had told me. So, okay. Yeah, that's fantastic. That's super cool. I'm on the compost wagon. I just don't know enough about it.
Yeah, I understand.
Cool. So I want to talk about mulches just a little bit more broadly, and kind of what's a little bit more common in Oklahoma, since the composting is not as mainstream as it is in other parts of the country. We see straw blowing, and this has been around in Oklahoma for a long time. Be it straw blowing, you hear the different terms, hay mulching or straw mulching. Kind of made to be the same thing, two different products from a technical standpoint. But the point is, straw blowing or hay mulching is inexpensive, it's versatile, and can be done very quickly. And so straw mulching achieves, when done properly, achieves a couple of different desired results. In that, one, a straw or hay blanket dissipates energy, but when it's crimped in, crimped in or tacked down, it's not blown away, and then it reduces sheet flow. So it's kind of winning at the erosion control battle in two different ways. A lot of times, you know, straw mulching can be used as a temporary cover, and it can be used as part of a permanent establishment of vegetation as well. So, right, you can blow straw and tack it down or crip it into place. It's a temporary stabilization with or without seed. You put seed in it, and then it can become part of a permanent revegetation or a permanent stabilization at that point. It's inexpensive because we grow lots of hay most years, maybe not this year, but we grow lots of hay in Oklahoma, and typically straw is available. There are fewer and fewer farmers that are actually baling up straw these days. Straw is the product of a grain, and so it is a hollow fiber like a straw. Fewer people doing that. So for the most part now, straw mulching or straw blowing is typically hay. So that's one thing to know and kind of think about. It's important to be an informed consumer. Know what rate is being applied. If you are the one paying for a straw mulch application, know how much straw or hay you're getting. Hydromulching is another one. I'll dive into that in a little bit more detail here in a second. But again, it's a similar process in that you need to know what you're getting into, know what you're buying, know what you're paying for. Typically, the rates for that ought to be like pounds per the acre versus hay or straw tons per the acre. Just kind of some jargon to think about when you're the one paying for it. I say on here, hydromulching, maybe the most versatile BMP. I made a career previously with hydromulching. I've talked to tons of people previously, all the time, that have tried hydromulching, tried hydroseeding. Sometimes those terms are used interchangeably. And they say, well, it didn't work. And I say, well, I wouldn't have made a career out of it and been able to do it from the Rio Grande up to the Great Lakes. And there wouldn't be such a big industry for hydromulching products and hydromulchers in general if it wasn't an effective BMP. It's very effective. It's very versatile. It has to be done in the right way. It has to be done at the right rates. If anybody ever has any sort of questions or wants to really dive into the nuts and bolts behind hydromulching, man, I can go into details to the nth degree about what's important. The key takeaways to hydromulching is that if you are the buyer, if you're paying somebody to hydromulch for you, you need to be able to see hydromulch that covers the ground and not see any bare dirt. That means the hydromulch needs to be covered from two different directions. There shouldn't be any such shadows. If you've got clumps and clods, which is common on construction sites, you shouldn't be able to see the back sides of those clods. It ought to be a three-dimensional coverage of the bare soil. And when it's three-dimensional coverage of the bare soil, then the hydromulch reduces the impact of the raindrop, allows filtration, which reduces. It's a great and very versatile BMP when it's done properly, with or without grass seed. It can be used for dust control. It can be used for erosion control. It can be used for sedimentation control when it's all done in the right way. So again, I won't go too far into it. Anybody can hit me up anytime and we can talk about it in depth. I want to roll into straw blankets or blankets in general. This would be essentially an alternative to hydromulching or straw blowing. These are products that come in a rolled form, typically 8 feet wide. different, I don't know why this is jumping up, but let's go back to it. Blankets, erosion control blankets, typically come in the rolled form. The most common ones are straw blankets and Curlex blankets. Curlex being a wood fiber. It's an Excelsior. I should back up. Straw blankets and Excelsior blankets. Curlex happens to be a brand. We carry both straw blankets and Curlex blankets, the wood fiber blanket. Generally, this is cheaper, much cheaper than hydro mulching, much cheaper than sod. The idea behind blankets, again, is to minimize the impact of raindrops. Uh-oh. Bear with me, guys. Sorry. Two types of blankets. I'll talk about straw and the Excelsior fiber. Straw, just what it sounds like, made of straw fibers, typically wheat, sometimes rice grain, but both grains, straws, they're hollow fiber, they're slick. They are very good at dissipating the energy of raindrops, but they're not very good at holding moisture, retaining moisture, or cooling the surface of the soil. So if somebody is trying to grow grass underneath an erosion control blanket, I typically would recommend Curlex fibers or the Excelsior fiber, a Curlex blanket. Curlex, the wood fiber, retains moisture. They are engineered fibers in that they're not just reclaimed straw. They are scratched off of big pieces of timber. They have little curls on them. The fibers interlock, and the fibers actually retain moisture. And as they retain moisture, they expand. So they will expand and take up the gaps underneath them, like from tracks, for example. Whereas straw will just tint right over the top of it with gaps underneath. Water can concentrate and run underneath straw. So straw blankets, very inexpensive, great for flat slopes, not very good for any sort of slope, 2-to-1, 3-to-1, 4-to-1. I'd go with Curlex or an Excelsior fiber. Get those interlocking fibers. They're going to hold not only moisture, but they're also going to hold the seed and keep seed from going down slope. If we look at, so we've been talking about erosion control. Now we're going to kind of bridge. I got to speed up just a little bit. We're going to bridge in between erosion and sedimentation control. This is kind of the go-to for everybody, right? We all know that. One thing I like to point out, and I can't remember the numbers right offhand, but if you look at the bottom left-hand part of this slide, you can see the one. We've got 3 flows coming into kind of an L shape there, right? We're catching a lot of area. I think what it says is 1 acre, and that's probably 100 linear feet of silt fence. The better idea is to split that up into 2 different segments, and then you look down from there and you see that silt fence was broken into 4 sections with J-hooks, and then you go from there and you look to the bottom right, and those are just little hoops of silt fence. Idea being with silt fence, and we've all seen this, anybody and everybody has seen silt fence blown out and then silt fence replaced with silt fence, and that silt fence is blown out and blown out and blown out and blown out and goes down the line, right? The more we concentrate the flow, then the higher the energy and the higher the volume behind it. It's going to blow out a silt fence, even if it's done right. So if we can interrupt, if you look at that picture, that's a great illustration of breaking up that flow. And that's not a very big area, but that's a lot of water behind that silt fence. It's holding a bunch, it's doing its job. And the only reason it's doing its job is it's broken into 2 separate segments, or I guess 3 separate segments. You try to divide the sheet flow coming to an area with those little J hooks on it. Silt fence is a great product. We sell a lot of silt fence plows, and I love them. They're great. They make silt fence installation easy, but they make it really easy to be lazy with your silt fence installation, if you know what I mean. It's easy to go in and put in 1,000 feet of silt fence. 1,000 feet of silt fence uninterrupted without J-hooks is not a good idea. It's going to be a blowout, guaranteed, down the road. So think about J-hooks. Think about dividing the space into smaller pieces. Wattles, compost socks, same thing. They can be used as slope interrupters, and they can also be used interchangeably with silt fence. They don't have the storage capacity as silt fence, but keep in mind that straw wattles or compost socks used appropriately are not going to be in long continuous runs the same way that we see silt fence typically installed. Talk about our triangular silt dikes a little bit. I'm a little biased. I think they may be the most durable and versatile erosion and sedimentation control barrier. I put that "and" on there because they serve both purposes. They can, not only catch sediment, but they can be used as a cross-check device, a slope interrupter device, which makes them an erosion control device as well. We sell them in a 5-inch, an 8-inch, and a 10-inch. So 10-inch was our original. That's the one everybody's familiar with. That's used as the ditch check that everybody sees on ODOT projects. The 5-inch we typically use or see used along curbs or as inlet protection devices. The 8-inch is kind of an alternative to wire-backed silt fence. It's the 8-inch height allows for a little bit greater storage capacity than the 5-inch, but it's low enough that it can be driven over. Think about construction. Think about home sites. You're building a house. The supply company shows up with shingles. He drives over the wire-back silt fence, runs the crane up, shoots shingles up on the roof, right? Now you got to go back and replace the wire-back silt fence. Our 8-inch is designed to contain sediment, but be driven over and be able to spring back. I'm not saying that they last forever, but they last a long time. They're made from an open cell polyurethane foam. They will spring back. They're not necessarily designed to be reusable, although they do spring back. If they're used the way they're supposed to be used and in the places where they ought to be used, the open cell foam will collect sediment fines and they will become heavy with time. So we don't look at them as being reusable, but they're very durable. One thing I like to point out with our triangular silt dike barriers is the skirt. And so you can see on the picture in the top left, you can see the skirt. The other pictures, you cannot see the skirt. Bottom left, you cannot see the skirt because it's covered in sediment, absolutely covered in sediment. That is not erosion, that is sedimentation. That is the deposition of eroded soils. So soil has eroded from somewhere upstream on this construction site and has hit the triangular silt dike barrier and has fallen out from suspension and been deposited on site. And this goes back to the crux of stormwater pollution prevention and compliance. So your SWIP compliance is minimizing offsite discharge, right? So our triangular silt dikes, they're not a filtering product. They settle out and they retain soil on site. Bottom right-hand picture is one glued down, very versatile. You can glue them down on concrete. You can pin them down on dirt. Very easy to install, lightweight, great product. Now I gotta hustle up here. Erosion control alone, again, I've kind of hit on this with the blankets. It's preventing soil loss. It's preventing soil from moving into motion. An erosion control product we've been gaining a lot of ground with right now is Flexamat. It is a tied concrete block, so it's an alternative to riprap. It's an alternative to concrete liners. It is concrete block that's formed in a biaxial geogrid. Grass grows through it. It's designed to be vegetated. It can be infilled with other products. It can be infilled with chat or crusher run or any sort of fines to create something different. But the idea is that you can grow grass with a hard armament system that can be mowed and maintained just the same as turf grass. And I think that bottom right picture is a great illustration. This is a spillway of a pond in the bottom right. So it doesn't receive concentrated flow very often, but when it does, it's high velocity and high volume. And the Flexamat stays in place. It's all tied together. It's a big system. I'm yakking. We're running out of time here. Has anybody got any questions? Has everybody got my contact info if they want to learn more or talk more or hear me go on and on?
Gosh, thanks, Josh. I did put your contact information into chat, along with a few other things. And if you don't mind me taking over real quick, I have something I'm going to share real quick. So yeah, if anyone needs Josh's information, it is already in chat. So just pop in there and check that out. Let me get my... All right. Well, thank you again for a wonderful presentation. I didn't see any questions in chat. So if anybody wants to unmute themselves or type into chat or raise your hand, just let us know somehow that you have a question. I'm going to keep visiting for just a sec with a couple reminders. I did post the monthly webinar series registration information into chat, and Josh, I was able to send you an email with that information as well. So if anyone, you're welcome. If anyone did want to join us, September is the one on Compost. So feel free to register for that series, and we'll be happy to get you added to that calendar event. If anyone wants a certificate of attendance for today's presentation, please send me an email. And I did put my email address into chat for that. As I've mentioned, a recording of today's presentation will be available on our website in a week or so, and I've put that link into chat as well so that we can find and rewatch this great presentation. And I learned something new. I didn't know that you could use hydromulch for dust control. I never even thought about that. So that was a great tip that I learned today.
Heck yes. Heck yes. It's a great thing.
Yeah.
Very versatile.
Wonderful. I still don't see any questions in chat. Did anyone have any questions? I'm trying to look at the people to see if anyone's unmuting. I don't see anybody unmuting at this time. Well, we'll hang out here for... Oh,
I think we've got one right here. Maybe not. I just clicked on it. I don't know if it's going to do anything, but maybe not. Thought it was a question, but I don't think it was. Okay.
All right. So, Josh, if you don't mind hanging out for a few minutes, we can just in case somebody has some questions.
Yeah, totally.
At the end. So thank you, everyone, for attending today's session. I hope everyone enjoyed the presentation. We hope to see you again at one of our upcoming webinars. August 17th at 1 p.m. is the next installment in our Stormwater Quality Monthly webinar series. The August presentation will be provided by Dawson McNeil, the Environmental Section Supervisor for Stormwater Quality, and Dawson will be sharing an interesting project. It's the his 2021 bacterial monitoring project on the Oklahoma River is really a very interesting project. We also have one more virtual lunch and learn session in the works. It'll be October 12th and will feature TrueGrid permeable pavers. And we will send out a registration announcement for that via our new Gov Delivery email service closer to the event date. So I pulled up this slide. So you can see we actually have 3 different ways of communicating information to anyone who's interested. So if you're just interested in construction training and education, such as the Lunch and Learns and webinars that we're going to be hosting, or just the tips and tricks and other things that we post from time to time, be sure to point your phone's camera to that first QR code with the little T-Rex. I don't know why they gave us a T-Rex, but I think it's kind of cute. And the one in the middle is for industrial permittees. If some of you folks aren't already getting the Gov delivery emails, then feel free to sign up for that. And we did transition since Brooke got a different position, our outreach coordinator. We did transition to this Gov delivery system instead of sending it from a single person. So it's just a little bit easier for us. And it's super easy for you guys to unsubscribe if you're not interested. And then the third one is our quarterly newsletter. So that's just going to talk about our entire division and some of the projects and things like our waterway clean sweeps and our household hazardous waste special collections and stuff like that. We also usually have staff spotlights on there. So if you want to learn a little bit more about some of the inspectors and our other staff, that's another way to find out about that. So again, if anybody needs any information or needs to sign up for something, you can always email me, use the QR codes to sign up for the announcements. Yeah, thanks for attending. Let me know if you need anything, and hope everyone has a great afternoon.
Thanks.